You know, you don't have to look very far and very hard to know that God's an organized God. And I would say if there's ever any confusion in a decision that you're making, it could be an indication that God's not in it. Because God is not a God of chaos. He's very orderly and He's very organized. In fact, the more that you look at this universe, the more we realize how organized God is, because He's the creator of all. Everything in it is connected. It is. I mean, you look at how the earth is even built. It's tilted perfectly, you know. I mean, just a fraction of a degree either way, we burn up or we freeze to death. And just the perfect order and alignment of how everything rotates around each other, and the earth itself rotates, but everything is connected. And in that, there are laws. There are laws, okay? For instance, there's a law of gravity. That's what I'm talking about. These are, God created these things, okay? Now look, I don't understand the law of gravity. Nobody does, really. Einstein said it doesn't make sense. It doesn't. I mean, when something is spinning around, it usually throws things off. I mean, it repels them, all right? I mean, the earth's spinning, it makes sense to me that instead of things being held down, we ought to be just flying all over the place. We should. It just doesn't make sense. No scientist has ever given a full explanation of the law of gravity. And we learned this in the 6th grade. We did. Okay? And a point I want to make is this. I don't understand internal combustion of the engine that's in my car, but it doesn't stop me from driving my car. I get up every day and I have to go somewhere. And these aren't theories, these laws, they aren't theories, they're laws, as most refer to them, scientists and us too. But what we've been covering in this Financially Fit series, I've been referring to these as principles because they're fundamental truths that serve as foundations for our beliefs. They're foundational beliefs. They just are. God has established the universe and certain natural laws, physical laws, but there are spiritual laws too. Natural laws and physical laws, we see these by looking around at creation and looking at each other. But the spiritual laws we get from His Word, if you will, okay? But my point in all this is you don't have to understand the laws or the principles to benefit from them. You just don't. You just don't. I don't have to understand why God does what He does. You know what my responsibility is? It's just to cooperate. It's just to do it. That's right. Just do it. Just do it. And if you do, guess what? You're going to benefit from them. You are. Whether you understand it or not, you're going to benefit from it. I relate this to my salvation experience. At the age of 17, I did not understand what I was doing when I went down and knelt at the altar and asked Jesus to save me. I didn't understand that at all, but I just did it. And now, ever how many years it's been, okay, I understand a little more. I do. But in this series, we're looking at God's principle or laws for money. We've looked at the laws of wealth, and I've said this now for a couple of weeks. We're not a prosperity gospel church. We're not teaching that. We do not believe that God wants everybody to be millionaires. All right? We're all at different economic levels, or we all have different economic statuses in life. Jesus taught us that. In fact, He teaches just the opposite. He teaches just the opposite of prosperity gospel. Jesus says the value of a man's life is not how much you accomplish or how much you accumulate in life. But God has given us certain laws and principles about our finances, and He expects us to follow them, I believe. Okay? He's given us truths on spending, on saving, managing our money, okay, investing our money, and also giving. Okay? And if you do these things, whether we understand them or not, we're going to benefit from them. You will benefit from them. And I'll say this too, and I said it last week. You don't even have to be a believer, and you'll benefit from them. You will. I'm going to give you some examples next week of people who have benefited from this, all right? We just cooperate with them, all right? And many of them are conditional promises. They are. They're conditional promises. We've looked a lot, particularly last week, at Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and those two books deal a lot with money management. Okay, and I mentioned last week that Solomon, he was the king of Israel, son of David, King David. He's the wisest man that ever walked the face of the earth next to Jesus. Okay, he asked God. God said, "Ask me for anything, you can have it." And he says, "I want wisdom." And he said, God told him, "Because you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you much more." And he made him rich, one of the richest men, one of the wealthiest men to ever walk the earth. But as a result, he wrote those two books, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, that have so much to do with money management. And so just to recap really quickly, all right, we spent the first couple of weeks talking about 7 principles of wise money management that Jesus taught us in the parable of the talents. A lot of times we think that's about stewardship of our gifts, and it certainly is. But it's also a parable about money management, and there are 7 principles in there. We also talked about, the second week, the 10-10-80 budget formula, and I hope some of you are trying that out. All right, last week was the principle of contentment. I gave you 5 reasons that we need to learn to be content, and 5 principles that are the secret of contentment. And I said this: if you don't get the principle of contentment, these other principles aren't going to work for you. They just aren't. You have got to become content with where you are in life. Paul said, "I have learned to be content when I have plenty. I've learned to be content when I have nothing." Okay? And that's where we have to be in life. All right? Now, if you missed any of those messages, you can go online and watch them now. Some of you know this, I don't know, but our YouTube account is open. So, we had a little delay in doing that. Yep. The QR code for it is right here. And I want you to go out there right now. I want you to scan that QR code, go out there right now, and subscribe. And I want you to like everything out there, okay? All right, whether you've watched it or not, okay? But go out there and watch it, okay? Because what happens is when you subscribe and you like it and you comment, it drives people to us and they discover us. So go out there. You're welcome to do it right now. Some of you are scanning. Go ahead, do it. Do it. And subscribe while you're out there and like everything. You're going to like it when you watch it anyway. So later on, it's going to be, this will be on our new website, and we're working on that now. And so, but it'll be on our website. But next week, what we're going to do, this week and next week, we're going to look at a set of foundational principles about money management called the principle of sowing and reaping. Now, we touched on this in the series, What Good Is Our Giving? But we focused on giving and the promises of God if we do give the way that He tells us to. But rather than just look at reaping and sowing, the principle of, as it pertains to giving, I want to go a little bit deeper than that. I want us to look at it in its entirety, if you will. And we start in Proverbs again this week, Proverbs 11:18. And I want to say this about Proverbs, or about a proverb, okay? And there are many different kinds, but I'm speaking of biblical proverbs, all right? Proverbs aren't necessarily promises, okay? Look, I didn't say you could watch it here while but it's okay. It's all right. If you need to, that's fine. If you need to catch up, that's okay. But Proverbs aren't necessarily promises, okay? And what they are is they're wise sayings that speak to what is likely to happen, okay? Now, however, if there's a call to action, okay, Proverbs can be a guaranteed promise and a blessing if we follow through, and a benefit for our life, all right? And Proverbs 11, verse 18 is one such proverb. So let's read it. It says, "A wicked person earns deceptive wages." And in all transparency, I've been that person, okay? I've earned some wages illegally and immorally and unethically. I have in life, all right? But it goes on to say, the one who sows righteousness reaps a sure reward, all right? The second half of that is a conditional promise. It's a premise with a promise. And in this verse, though, we have one example of the law or the principle of sowing and reaping. It says this, the one who sows righteousness reaps a sure reward. All right, I want you to circle or underline those words, sows and reaps. Okay? What he's talking about here is sowing and reaping where your income is concerned. And he says that there are dishonest ways to earn money and there's honest ways. All right? And sowing and reaping is a farming analogy. I know you know that. And the Bible uses this a lot, this analogy a lot, because it was a primary way to earn income in ancient times. All right? So for thousands of years, the way people farmed was they would go out by hand, dig up the ground, and then they would sow. It's the process of planting. Farmers would have a little bag or a knapsack, and they would just spread it. They would just broadcast it. Okay, much like I do today. My yard's not big enough that I need a broadcaster, a piece of equipment to do that. I just do it by hand. All right, and it's actually called broadcasting. That's what it's called. And some of that seed, when they would throw it out, the birds would get it. How many of you plant seed and you watch the birds eat them up? They do. They do. And but some of them would fall on rock and they wouldn't come up. But majority would hit the ground, land in the ground, and actually get planted and begin to grow a little, all right? And the principle is this, whatever you sow is what you're going to reap. So, and I want you to understand this, okay, because this is important. This principle doesn't just apply to your money. It applies to all things in your life, your relationships, your talents, your gifts, your time. Anything, okay? What you sow is what you reap. So let's start with the 9 principles or 9 truths of sowing and reaping in life. And I'm going to give you 5 today, and then we're going to cover 4 next week. The first one is this. Everything starts with a seed. Everything does. Every dream, every achievement, every building that's ever been built was an idea or a dream, okay? It was a seed, a thought, an idea. Your life began with a seed. I don't know if you realize that or not, but it did. It did. All right? Everything starts with a seed. God created the world in what could be called the seed principle, really. And He brings our attention to this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 11. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seeds in it, according to their various times. And so it was, it says. Now maybe you've heard this before. You probably have. Anybody can count the seeds of an apple, but only God knows how many apples are in a seed. All right? Because the seed has exponential potential. It does. You take one seed, you plant it in the ground, it grows into a tree that produces fruits and crops that has other seeds, and so on and so forth, okay? Over the course of 1,000 years, you can have an entire forest, hundreds of thousands of acres from one single seed. How many of you ever seen the giant redwoods? You ever seen any? Coastals, whether they're sequoias or whatever, okay? How many of you know how big a seed is from a redwood? Veronica brought this in this morning, and that is a cone from a redwood, a coastal redwood. They grow about 250 feet tall. But in this cone, there could be hundreds of seeds. There could be, because they're the size of a tomato seed. You know how big a tomato seed is? It's tiny. It's really tiny. But just think about that. A tree that produces a cone with maybe at least dozens, if not hundreds of seeds in it, can grow. We've seen a redwood 380 feet tall, 30 feet around. And to put that in perspective, this room is just about 30 feet wide. Okay? That's how big around this tree was. All right? So, that is an example of exponential potential. If you ever go to the redwood, you ever go to some redwood forest and see them, there are thousands of them. They grow close together. They're not deep-rooted trees, and they grow close together for a reason. And maybe I'll tell you that one day when we have time. But the book of Zechariah, and we've used this verse many, many times. We started this church using this verse. Zechariah 4:10, don't despise the day of small beginnings, because everything starts small. Everything starts with a seed, okay? Every idea, every thought, every dream is a seed. The second principle is this: nothing happens until the seed's planted. Nothing happens until the seed's planted. Nothing happens in your life. Nothing happens anytime until the seed is planted. A few years ago, we cleaned off the south side of our yard. It was wooded. We took out a ton of trees. I've taken out so many trees where we live. One of the ways that Renee and I relax is we like to work out in the yard. We do. I mean, we like to get out there and spend the whole day. We'll get dirty and nasty, covered in dust, and we just love doing it. But I was late planting one year because we had some trouble with some equipment and ended up not getting seed on the ground till the end of May. And you know that's crazy, because what happens in the summer, the heat hits, the rain stops. But you know what? We'd had a really wet winter, wet spring. Early summer was even wet, and I wasn't concerned. So I said, you know what? If it doesn't come up right away, it'll come up this fall. And sure enough, it didn't come up right away. And so I got a little nervous. Yeah. But October, man, it came forward. It did. It came forward. Now, this past November, December, I have an armadillo that lives under my barn. And he's a big old thing. He's just grubbing up the backyard. I'm grateful that he stays primarily back there. But around Thanksgiving, sometime around then, he came around to the front yard and he plowed it under. I mean, I was angry. I was angry. He dug and rooted holes, multiple holes the size of my fist, and just tore up my front yard, particularly along the driveway as it goes out. Many of you have seen my driveway, and so I had to get out there. I had to fix it. I had to rake it all back in, and even add some dirt to it and replant it. And I thought, okay, while I'm doing this, I'm going to replant everything and just replant the whole front yard. It's kind of small. It's an area about like this, and so we came back from Tallahassee. We took a trip down to Tallahassee on Monday, came back Wednesday evening. We were sitting there, and I told Renee, I said, I don't know why the rest of that grass has not come up. It's come up beautifully around the driveway. I mean, it's super green, it's lush looking, and I don't know why it hasn't come up. Well, I found out Thursday morning why it hadn't come up. I'm out there in the garage, and the bucket of seed is still sitting in my garage. I never planted it all. I planted around the driveway and just quit for some reason. All right? I did. I never planted it. You know what? Nothing happens with seed that's left in a bucket in the garage. Seeds are meant to be planted. They are. Now, imagine this. Imagine a farmer. He does this for a living. He plants for a living. But imagine him saying, you know what? I don't know if I should plant or not. I bought all this seed. Should I plant it? You know, I spent all my savings on it. What if I lose it? What if I lose my life savings that I've already spent on this seed? I don't plant it. We'd say that farmer's pretty foolish, right? I mean, you're in the business of farming, okay? Because the seed's worthless unless it's planted. It doesn't do anything but sit there. Now that seed in my garage, it's okay, but it's not doing anything just sitting there, okay? It won't do anything till I put it to work. It won't do anything until I put it in the ground. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. All right, the same thing with your financial situation, okay? In the same way, we can't just say the economy's bad, it's terrible, I'm not making any money. We've got to get out there and make some things happen. We have to plant some seed. Okay, so some of us are thinking, okay, I'm waiting on God. I prayed. I'm going to tell you this, and this may be controversial to you. You can pray till Jesus comes back. But then we're supposed to get out and do some things, okay? That's taking a step of faith. We could have prayed for God to start this church, but if we never took a step and did anything, we'd still be before ground zero. We would, okay? And God says this, you're waiting on me? What? You're waiting on me? Okay, I'm waiting on you to plant some seed, okay? You aim at nothing, you're going to hit it every time, okay? And nothing happens until the seed is planted. Nothing's going to happen in your life financially speaking. You're not going to get out of the hole until maybe we acquire a second stream of income. And that's where we're at. I told you a couple of weeks ago, we're looking at different ways to earn money, okay? We are. Well, why does God do this in our lives? Because of this, okay? He wants us to act in faith. He wants us to trust Him. You know, I've got to take what I've got and I've got to give it away. I've got to put it to work, all right? I've got to put it into play. And that takes an act of faith. That takes an act of faith. I got to step out here. You know, you're not going to get a job unless you put in an application, submit a resume, and even call them back and harangue them, even when they tell you, hey, you don't have to do that. All right? You got to do that, okay? It takes what I've got, letting go, and God planting seeds, all right, and I planting seeds with God. It's an act of faith, okay, and it brings glory to God. And look, it brings exponential potential into your life too. The possibility for gains. The possibility for you to get ahead in life, okay? Simply by trusting God and putting your best foot forward. Am I saying you shouldn't pray? No. I'm saying that's the first thing you should do. But then you got to get up and work like it depends on you. And that's when God comes in and starts to show out. Jesus explained this principle to us when He was explaining why to a bunch of Greeks and His disciples and people that were following, why He came to earth to die. And look at John chapter 12, verse 24. It's on your outline there. It's on the screens. He says, I'm telling you the truth. A grain of wheat remains no more than a single grain unless it's dropped into the ground and dies. If it does die, then it can produce many grains. It reproduces over and over again. So He uses the principle here of reaping and sowing to point out that nothing happens until we plant. We have to plant. The third principle is this: whatever I sow, that's what I'm going to reap. Whatever I sow is what I reap. This is the law of reproduction, if you will. Farmer goes out, if he's got a trailer load of beans and he plants them, what's he going to get? He's going to get beans. He's not going to get watermelons. Okay, nobody's ever seen a grapefruit grow on a corn stalk. All right, you get corn when you plant corn. All right, baby cows, man, they make baby cows. They do, and whatever you plant, that's what you're going to get back. Farmer doesn't doubt that either. He doesn't question it. Okay, he knows whatever I plant, that's what I'm going to reap. This applies to everything in mine and your life. It does, including our finances. Whatever we plant with our finances, however we conduct ourselves financially, is what we're going to reap, okay? There's a phrase that's repeated over and over in the book of Genesis, and it goes like this. God says, each is to reproduce after its own kind. All right? It's like I'm saying, tomatoes produce tomatoes, not potatoes, okay? Apple trees bear apples. They do. Cows make cows. Humans make baby humans. We do. In God's economy, we reproduce after our own kind. All right? We reap the same thing that we sow. All right? This can either be positively or negatively. It can impact our lives, okay? Whether you sow, whatever you sow, that's what you're going to reap. Galatians 6:7 teaches this. Don't be deceived. A man or a woman reaps what he sows, okay? You'll reap exactly what you plant in life, all right? He's saying here, whatever I dish out, that's what I'm going to get back. What goes around comes around, if you will. If I'm out planting seeds of kindness, guess what? People are probably going to be kind to me. They are. If I show people grace and mercy and I cut people slack, they're going to show me grace and mercy and cut me slack. They are. If I'm forgiving, people are going to be forgiving of me. If I'm generous to people, guess what? People are more likely to be generous to me. Whatever you sow, that's what you reap. Okay? The opposite is true too of those things I just mentioned. All right? Israel, God's really coming down on Israel in Hosea chapter 10. He says, you planted wickedness, now you're about to reap it. You're about to reap it, okay? So let's plant the good stuff, all right? Let's plant with everything that we have. Let's plant with love and with kindness. Let's sow great financial seeds, seeds of generosity, all right? The next one is this, and this principle may surprise you, I'm not sure, all right? But I'm not the only sower. You're not the only sower in your life. What that means is you're reaping both good and bad from what other people are sowing around you or who are that have sowed, okay? There are people that you work with. There are people who are in your family that came before you. Yes, your parents and grandparents perhaps, all right? And they've been sowing. They've been sowing for generations. And in many ways, okay, you are reaping from the previous generation. Let me give you a corporate example where our national debt is concerned. We just reached, the United States just passed $34.37 trillion in debt. That's astronomical. It is. And chances are, unless something happens, if, and these are big ifs, the country doesn't surpass that unrecoverable mark, okay? We're at about 98%, they say. At 150%, it's unrecoverable. It's unsustainable. At 2,000%, we're done. And they say in about 20 years that may happen. I personally think it's going to happen sooner than that. But that's just me. But if something doesn't happen, okay, guess what? Your great-grandchildren's grandchildren will be paying off that debt. They will. They will. Now, you enjoy many things that we didn't work for, that we didn't pay for. All right? You enjoy the freedom of America, the greatest country in the world that you could live in, okay? And what I'm talking about is that other people died in wars 250 years, the past 250 years, and that provides for us the blanket of freedom that we sleep under every single night, okay? We didn't work for it, okay? They sowed with their lives. They sowed with their lives, and we're reaping the benefit of that. There are so many things that we get the benefit of, okay, that are the result of other people's sowing and reaping. One example is this church. We started this church so that generations from now, okay, people could experience this, okay? Because we want to reach people for generations to come until Jesus comes back. But unfortunately, we've also been hurt by other people because they have sown poorly. Okay? Some of you grew up in families where there's a history of multiple generations of abuse. Drug abuse, alcohol abuse, sexual abuse. And today, church family, we need to drive a stake and say it stops here. This is it. I'm not passing that junk on to my kids in the next generation, okay? And I'm going to say this, men, we have to lead the way in this. We do, all right? We have to drive the stake and we have to stand up and we have to lead our families, All right, some of you are saying, some of you may be thinking, okay, my wife won't submit to me. All right, she won't follow me. And if that's the case, then you have to ask yourself an honest question. Where are you leading her? And I'm going to say something that's controversial here, okay? All right? She is under no biblical obligation to submit to you if you aren't leading her biblically. Okay? I'm sorry. Yes, she can still love you. She can still serve you. And she does. And she will. But if you want her to submit to you biblically, like Paul writes to us and instructs us to, all right, we have to lead biblically. And you know what? Some of us grew up in situations where there's generational sin and we weren't taught this. We weren't. Now, my dad wasn't necessarily a big dad, but he died when I was 14. So I didn't have anybody to tell me how to be a great husband, how to be a Christian husband. Okay? But you can learn that. You can learn that here if you're open to it. You can. But you have to start today and say, hey, I'm driving a stake. This is a new day. I'm starting a new legacy. All right? All of us have to say that. All of us have to be in on that, okay? What I'm saying is this, is there's consequences to everything that we do. Every single thing. It's just not you. You're not the only one that reaps those. Our children do. The next generation will. Because you reap both the positive and negatives for generations to come. You do. Your life is going to affect others, whether you realize it or not. And you just can't say, I'm just going to think about myself. You can't make that stupid statement that says, hey, this is my life and I'll do what I want to with it. Because you're a part of the human race and it affects others. I'm sorry, but it does. It's not just you, okay? It affects other people and it affects namely your family, those closest to you. If you're dishonest, it hurts you. It hurts you and those closest to you and others around you. It's a ripple effect. It is. Jesus told his disciples this in John 4, verse 38. I sent you to reap what others have worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor. You will reap the results of what you do, good or bad. But others will reap as well. They will. And so we have to be mindful of that we aren't the only sowers in life. But we have to drive a stake and do our part and sow the good stuff. Okay? We do. We have to think about the ripple effect of our decisions, the consequences. Okay? You remember a few weeks ago, I said, I think it was in the Reset series, I said, you're writing a story right now. You're writing your story. What story are you writing? What story are you writing? And how does that affect others? The fifth thing, and this is the last thing here, I always reap in a different season than I sow. I always reap in a different season than I sow. There's a delay when you sow. You know this. It's obvious. Plants take time to grow. There's no such thing as instant maturity. The farmer goes out, he plants, he tills the ground, and then he waits. He doesn't necessarily wait, but you just got to let it be, okay? You can't go out there and pull the dirt back and say, is it coming up? Okay? You just got to let it be, okay? There's no such thing as instant anything, okay? There's no such thing as instant success. There's instant fame, but there's not instant success. Somebody can be serving, practicing their craft, honing their skills for years in obscurity, and then all of a sudden overnight they're famous. All right? But they didn't get there overnight. They didn't. They honed their skills, like I said. It takes time to grow. It takes time to gather. It takes time to build that skill, okay? It takes time. It takes time to produce. Ecclesiastes tells us this, chapter 3. I didn't put all 5 verses on your outline, but I want you to go home and read them. All right? You can pull them up. It says there's a time for everything and a season for everything under heaven. There's a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to scatter, a time to gather. Okay? There's a time to sow, and then there's a time to reap. There are different seasons in life, if you will. So between the then and the now, or the now and what's coming next, I should say, there's always a delay. There is. And so during that time of delay, what's our responsibility? Well, that's when we water, okay? That's when we fertilize, okay? That's when we have a plan going into it. We make the investment, okay? And then we kind of stir the pot a little bit. We invest time and energy and even money into something that you know is right, okay? But the return isn't instant, okay? A lot of people look at Hope Church and say, wow, you should be a little bit further along, shouldn't you? I'm like, are you kidding me? You kidding me? We're 18 months old today. Today we're 18 months old. Yeah. We're twice the size of the average church in just 18 months. For heaven's sakes. We opened the doors and 157 people showed up. I want to be honest with you, it scared me to death. It did. I was scared primarily because we had this plan to launch at Easter of last year, and during that season, almost a year, we were going to build all the systems and structures, okay, to support that number of people. Well, guess what? We launched this church in 40 days. From the time we were exited to the time we had our first service, all right? We didn't have time to do any of that. So when 157 people show up, I'm like, what are we going to do with them? How are we going to handle this many people? Because we didn't have it all together. We didn't. But you know what? We're just right, man. We're right where God wants us to be. And this is thriving. I want y'all to know I love this. I love what God is doing here. My point is this, is that the fruit ripens slowly. Slow growth is always better too. It is. It is. Let me ask you this. Would you rather eat a vine-ripened tomato, or would you rather go to the grocery store and get one of those off the shelf? Okay? I mean, really, there's no comparison. You know what they do with those tomatoes? They pick them on the West Coast green. They spray them with nitrogen, put them in the truck so that they turn red on the shipment here, okay? And then you buy them, and there's really no comparison. There isn't. There isn't, is there? I mean, a vine-ripened tomato, which is allowed to grow slowly, and you pick it too soon, doesn't taste the same. Doesn't taste the same. Not all fruit ripens at the same time either. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. How many of you ever been to a peach orchard and got a basket full of peaches? And some of them are really, really firm. Some of them are a little too soft, but then there's some right there in the middle, okay? Do you know that peaches on the same tree ripen at different times? It does. It does. You pick a few every single day. It comes little by little. And this is the principle of money management, is that I reap in a different season than I sow. All right? And it may be a little at a time that it comes in. But when you start planning and sowing and you start following God's money management principles, there's not going to be a payoff tomorrow. It's going to come. It is. But just because you start practicing these principles, okay, you practiced them last week, there's not going to be a payoff this week. You're not going to hit the lottery this week. If you play the lottery, I hope you do. But no, it's not going to happen. More often than not, it comes over time. It ripens a little bit at a time. It never ceases to amaze me of the people who treat God like He's a vending machine. Really, I mean, I tried it and it didn't work. Well, I'm like, how many times did you come? Well, I just came once. Well, really? It's not going to work. That's not going to work. There's no such thing as quick fixes. It does not exist in anything. You can patch something, but that doesn't mean it's a fix, okay? Some of us put $10 in the offering plate, and I'm supposed to get a $100,000 job this week. That's not how it works. God's not a genie, okay? We serve Him. He doesn't serve us. He doesn't. God's not a vending machine where you put in a tithe and then all of a sudden you get whatever you want. That's not what I'm talking about. That's prosperity gospel, by the way, okay? But there's always a season between when I sow and when I reap. Always, always. And while I'm waiting, while I'm working the soil, while I'm doing what I should be doing, God is at work too. And a lot of times when I'm thinking nothing is happening, it's happening, y'all. It's really happening. It is. While I'm waiting on God to work and while that seed is hidden in the ground and is slowly germinating, one day it's going to burst forth. It is. It's going to burst forth. It's going to happen. It is. I mean, and then this is what Jesus was referring to about the seed dying, okay? The seed itself doesn't die. The little embryo inside of it lives. But what happens when that thing germinates and it bursts forth, the structure of the seed dies. Then it becomes a plant. It breaks ground. All right? It does. And God's in it. And life, it starts to grow. It starts to grow. The same thing's true about your finances. It is. Doesn't mean you're going to be rich, but it means that little shoot's going to come out of the ground and you're going to know that things are beginning to work. I can't tell you what that season is in your life. All I can tell you is that if you're consistent in these principles, they will work, okay? But rarely does it happen instantly. It can, but it just doesn't. There's always a different season of reaping than when I sow or when I plant, okay? What we have to have is some stick-to-itiveness, all right? That's not a word, by the way, but I like it, and we're going to use it, okay? You ought to write it down, stick-to-itiveness. It is. That means we have to persevere, all right? We have to be long-suffering like God is. That's one of the attributes of God. He is long-suffering with us especially, okay? We have to have patience. And I would encourage you not to pray for patience. Just practice patience, okay? Every time I pray for patience, things just seem to get worse, all right? But look, we have to learn contentment and consistency. 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 All right? We do. That's what it takes. That's what it takes. Those are the number one problems we have with everything that we're involved in. We're not content because we aren't committed and we lack consistency. Drive a stake and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this if it kills me. And you know what? You may come close to that. Seriously. But what other option do you have? There are no other options. Let me wrap up with this. Galatians 6 says this. Let us not grow weary. Let's trust the Lord because we will reap a harvest if we don't give up. That's Galatians 6:7, I believe it is. Some of you, your finances are a mess. In such a way it makes you want to cry and you're wondering how you're going to make it. You're wondering how you're going to make it, okay? The recession's not turning around for a while, but I will say this. With these principles, we can recession-proof our finances. We can. We can. Let's not participate in the recession. Let's do this thing God's way, okay? Next week, I want to give you 4 more principles, the last 4 of reaping and sowing. And also, we're going to talk about a little more about this consistency thing and commitment, okay? I want to give you this verse before we leave. I want to leave you with this. I didn't put it on your outline, but I'll put it there. I'll have it there next week. It's Psalms 126, 5 and 6. Psalms 126, 5 and 6. Those who plant in tears will harvest with shouts of joy. They will weep as they go to plant their seed, but they sing as they return with the harvest.